Step back in time with me as I bake a delicious orange cake straight from a 1950s cookbook. Made with fresh oranges, chopped walnuts, and sweet dates, this vintage recipe is packed with flavor and nostalgia. Watch as I recreate this classic dessert and drizzle it with a sweet orange glaze that's sure to impress. The first thing that you're going to need to do is to take 1 cup of chopped pecans and 1 cup of chopped dates, and you're going to dredge those in about 1 to 2 tablespoons of flour. You're doing this to keep your pecans and dates from sinking to the bottom of the cake. Then you're going to cream 1 cup of butter or shortening, I'm using shortening, in a mixing bowl. Then you're going to gradually add 2 cups of sugar and cream that with a shortening. For this recipe, you're going to need 1 1/3 cup buttermilk. I don't have any buttermilk on hand, so I'm going to use a substitute. For every cup of milk, you need 1 tablespoon of vinegar. And you pour the vinegar into the cup first, and then you top it off with milk to equal 1 cup. However, I need a little over 1 cup, so I'm going to use 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon of white vinegar, and I'm going to top it off with some milk so that it equals 1 1/3 cup. And you want to allow this to sit for 5 minutes. I also need 1 teaspoon of baking soda, which I'm going to dissolve in the milk. You're going to need to separate 4 eggs, and you're going to add your 4 egg yolks to the sugar and cream mixture. The next step is to sift 4 cups of all-purpose flour 3 times. So I've got 2 large stainless steel mixing bowls, and I'm going to sift the flour into 1 bowl, then sift it again into the next bowl, and then back to the original bowl. That's 3 times. And now it's time to add the flour and the milk to the creamed mixture, alternating both. Now it's time to add our pecans and dates to the batter, and we're also going to add 2 tablespoons of orange rind that has been grated. And now it's time to beat our egg whites until stiff peaks form. Then we're going to fold the egg whites into the batter. Now I'm going to pour my mixture into a tube pan. The original recipe calls for lining the tube pan using wax paper, but I didn't want to do that, so I decided to spray mine with cooking spray that has flour added to it. You can do that, or you can do it by lining the pan with wax paper, whichever way you prefer. But it is going to be a little bit trickier getting it out of the pan using the method that I'm using. But I'll explain how you can do that, because you also have to pour the sauce over the cake while it's still warm. And now it's time to bake the cake. You're going to bake this cake in a preheated oven at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for about 1.5 hours. Please keep in mind that you may need to adjust either your oven temperature or baking time, depending on your oven. Mine tends to bake things quickly, and I didn't leave my cake in the oven for 1.5 hours. It finished baking before that. So just keep that in mind, especially if you're making this cake for the first time. You probably need to watch it the first time. And now it's time to make our topping for the cake. The recipe recommends that you make this before you start making the cake, but I decided to make mine while the cake is baking in the oven. So you're going to take 2 cups of sugar, 1 cup of fresh orange juice, and 2 tablespoons of grated orange rind. And you're going to mix those together in a mixing bowl and allow them to sit while you're making the cake and while the cake is baking in the oven. Now that my cake has finished baking, I let it cool for about 15 minutes, and then I removed it from the pan by placing a plate on top and then turning it over to release the cake ever so gently. And of course, you probably want to loosen it up with a butter knife before you turn it over upside down. And now I'm going to flip the cake again because I need to pour the topping over the cake while it's still warm. So I'm going to place the cooling grid that's been lined with parchment paper on top of the cake, and then I'm going to flip it again. This way I can catch the spillage from the topping. It will go onto the parchment paper, hopefully, and not leak everywhere. Now it's time to poke holes in the cake. Don't worry, we're almost there. I'm using a wooden skewer to poke holes, and I believe that's the best thing that you can use. Of course, if you don't have one, this is for shish kebabs. If you don't have anything like this, the metal or the wooden ones, then I guess you can use a straw or whatever you have that you feel will work best. You can also use an ice pick if you have one of those. I forgot about that. So you want to poke holes all over the entire cake, just on the top. Now you're going to pour the glaze over the cake. You want to do this in a controlled way. You don't want to just dump all the glaze over the cake at once, but gently pour it onto the cake. Ideally, you want to do this while the cake is still warm. That's the goal, not when the cake has cooled down. So that is kind of the disadvantage here of baking it the way that I did in a pan using the baking spray, but it was still warm as I was doing this. But if you were to bake it using the wax paper, that's probably even better. Okay, this is the cake after I've poured all the topping over it. I'm going to let it sit for about an hour to an hour and a half before I cut into it. As you can see, there was some spillage, so that's why you need some parchment paper underneath. And here it is, the finished orange cake from the 1950s. I somehow managed to transfer this to a cake plate without messing it up, thankfully. And it's just absolutely delicious. The walnuts and the dates bring just the right amount of texture and richness. So let's cut into this and give it a try. This cake is moist, citrusy, and absolutely divine. A true vintage delight that's sure to impress your family and friends. Thank you for joining me on this baking journey. And thank you for sticking around. If you've made it through the entire video, I do appreciate it. And please do consider subscribing to my TikTok channel if you haven't already done so, because I do plan to upload similar content in the future. And you can also find me on YouTube as well. And please do visit my Amazon page, where I make a lot of great recommendations about everything from things for the kitchen, things for the home, beauty products, fashion, fragrances, you name it. Thanks for watching.